From getting lost in the Australian Outback to surviving a 4,000-foot plunge through the air. Stay tuned to number 1 to find out who survived over 2 months by resorting to cannibalism. Number 10. 9 weeks in the Australian Outback. From time to time, some adventurous individual wants to embark on an extraordinary survival mission that will push them to the limits. However, on other occasions, some individuals suffer from mental health conditions that can sometimes cause them to make decisions without fully thinking them through. Matthew Allen was unfortunately the latter. The 18-year-old teenager walked out of the family home north of Sydney, Australia on the 27th of November in 2013 and wasn't seen again for 2 months. Although many feared the young teenager didn't make it, he was miraculously found by 2 hikers. This ordeal has left its mark on the teenager. He was found covered in leeches and mosquito bites, and he only weighed about 6 stone, which equates to half of his original body weight. He was also disoriented and partially blind. During the 9 weeks he was missing, he had survived on very little water and food, had no shelter, and endured a record-breaking heat wave. It is a true miracle that he survived, and even more fortunate that he was found. Thankfully, he is now at home with his family. Number 9. Falling 4,000 feet. You'd be forgiven to think that this next entry on this list is a lie, but it's not. Instead, it's an absolute miracle. Linda Harding, a student and skydiving fanatic from California, was on the trip of a lifetime with friends when the unbelievable event happened. After jumping out of a plane at 8,500 feet, the worst possible thing could happen to a skydiver happened when poor Linda's parachute failed to open. Those skydivers also have a reserve parachute when they jump. The parachute cord got tangled in the reserve, which left Linda falling at around 70 miles per hour for 40 seconds before she came crashing to the ground. By some miracle, Linda survived and sustained only broken ribs, a punctured lung, a broken nose, muscular back injuries, and a concussion. The student, who studied at Hull University, UK, was on a trip to America when the incident happened and was unconscious for 4 days after the fall. Doctors believe drag, her unconscious state as she fell, the semi-soft landing on grass, and the fact that she fell on her side all contributed to this miraculous escape from what should have been an unsurvivable fall. Rather surprisingly, she continued to skydive once she made a full recovery. Number 8. Plane crash in the Alaskan wilderness. This is the first of 3 plane crashes included on this list, but this is the shortest ordeal of the 3. This entry involves a family who was flying to begin their new lives in the rural Yukon River village 350 miles northwest of Anchorage, Alaska, when their plane hit a low mountain peak. When the plane crashed, the family of 4 were in a desperate state, with broken bones, internal injuries, and a pregnant mother. With the fear of wolves and not being found a constant worry on the father's mind, at one point he gave up hope, but thankfully they were found only 15 hours after the crash. Number 7. Running through the desert. It's time to meet Italian runner Mauro Properi, who set out to complete a brutal 6-day run in the Sahara Desert. Yes, that's right. There are some people out there who think it's a good challenge to try running a race in blistering heat and extremely dry and dangerous conditions. The run started well, and by the 4th day, Properi was making good time. However, he soon found himself in the middle of a prolonged 8-hour sandstorm that left him lost and alone. And a desert is not somewhere where you'd want to be lost. After failing to get the attention of 2 passing planes and with very little supplies, the runner was left with the difficult challenge of surviving in this hostile environment. As we've highlighted in a recent video about difficult places to live, humans have adapted to live in many challenging environments. But it's completely different when you're not used to the environment. Nevertheless, Properi did manage to survive for 10 days by drinking his own distilled urine and eating bats. Number 6. 69 days trapped underground. The next entry on this list might leave any viewers who suffer from claustrophobia wanting to turn away right now. Just imagine being entombed nearly half a mile underground and slowly starving and suffocating in extreme heat. Well, that's the unfortunate situation that 33 Chilean miners found themselves in back in 2010. For 17 days after the initial incident happened, authorities assumed the miners were dead. That was until a rescuer's drill penetrated their chamber and they managed to attach a note to it. To survive, the miners had to drink really filthy water that was used to cool the drills, and only had 93 packets of biscuits, 1 can of salmon, 1 of peaches, and 1 of peas. They did have around 10 bottles of water and 18 cans of tuna. However, 5 days after the first contact was made, the rescuers did manage to widen the tunnel large enough to pass down food and medical supplies. Nevertheless, this survival ordeal is one that no one would want to be in. Number 5. Plane crash in the Peruvian rainforest. The next entry on this list is another one that involved falling from a considerable height, but this time it wasn't an intentional jump. Instead, it was an accident caused by lightning. In 1971, Julian Kopke was flying across the Peruvian rainforest when the Lanza Flight 508 was hit by lightning when it flew into a storm. When the plane went into a nosedive, Julianne soon found herself ripped from the plane, but still strapped into her seat as she fell into the rainforest below. As the only survivor of the flight, after the other 91 people on board died when the plane broke into pieces 2 miles above the rainforest, she found herself all alone, lost in the rainforest. By some miracle, Julianne survived the fall with only a broken collarbone, some deep cuts on her, and a ruptured ligament in her knee, the latter of which she didn't even realize until later. Although she survived the fall and could hear search planes looking for survivors, the thick canopy meant that they couldn't see her, and she had to find another way to survive. After 10 days walking along creeks and rivers, she soon found a hut where she administered first aid to herself. The wound on her upper right arm was infected with maggots, so she poured some gasoline over the wound and pulled about 30 of the bugs from her own arm. She was later found by some men who took her back to civilization, where she learned the fate of the rest of the passengers, including her own mother. Number 4. Lost at sea. We've heard stories about plane crashes, deadly falls, deserts, being trapped underground, and lost in forests, but we've yet to include one about someone being lost at sea. It should be said that this is only one of many stories that could be told about people being lost at sea. Stephen Callahan was on a solo expedition in his sailboat, Napoleon Solo, when it was bumped by a whale during the night and slowly sunk to the bottom of the ocean. Poor Callahan found that he was adrift. Rescue operations are difficult at the best of times, but it is incredibly difficult to find someone lost at sea. Even today, with advances in technology, some people, and even entire planes, are never found once they've been lost at sea. Over the course of 76 days and floating around 1,800 miles, Callahan survived the blaring sun, dehydration, and even shark encounters to thankfully be found by some fishermen who rescued him. Number 3. Fleeing from Nazis. The next story is the oldest on this list and is centered on the action of a man named Balsrud, a young instrument maker who was helping the anti-Nazi resistance in Norway during the Second World War, when the boat he was on was attacked by German soldiers. After everyone else on the boat was killed, Balsrud managed to dive into the water, making his escape. With only 1 boot and 1 sock, and with 1 missing toe, which had been shot off, he managed to swim to the Norwegian coast, where he was rescued by 2 girls on the beach. But that was not the end of his ordeal. He then had to reach safety in Sweden. Along this journey, he faced even more hardship and bad luck. At one point, he fell 300 feet, was left blind, severely concussed, and wandering in the snow for days, suffering with hallucinations. And that's still not even the end of his story, but we just don't have enough time to discuss it in more detail here. Number 2. Climbing Sula Grande. In 1985, Joe Simpson and Simon Yates embarked on a journey to climb the Sula Grande via the, to date, unclimbed west face, only to face disaster on their way back down. While descending, Simpson fell and broke his right leg in heel. Not an injury you want to have when you're still less than halfway down the mountain. Facing the difficult challenge of getting Simpson down the mountain, Yates used ropes to lower Simpson down the mountain in stages, something which took a lot of energy for both of them and caused Simpson significant pain when his leg kept catching on the snow and ice. When you'd think that things couldn't get any worse, in bad weather, Yates managed to lower Simpson over the edge of an unseen cliff. It soon became clear that Yates was not able to pull him back up, and Simpson was unsure of the decision Yates would take. After a while, Simpson found himself falling 50 feet into a crevice below him. Looking up at the rope, he realized Yates was forced to cut it. While Simpson was aware that Yates had likely done it to stop himself from being pulled off the mountain, it didn't leave him in a good situation after he survived the fall. And I'm sure it put a strain on their friendship. With the broken leg and heel, Simpson still managed to climb out of the crevice and even reached the base camp 2 days later. Just in time, too, because Yates and another individual both assumed Simpson didn't make it and were planning on leaving the camp permanently. Before we get to number 1, take a moment to like this video and don't forget to subscribe. Number 1. Air Force Flight 571. Our number 1 entry is a story that shocked people when it came to light. Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571 was carrying 45 people when it crashed in the Andes on the 13th of October 1972, which happened to be a Friday. Talk about bad luck on Friday the 13th. Not all of the passengers survived the flight, with more than a quarter dying during the crash and several others in the days after the accident. The situation got even worse when an avalanche killed a further 8 people when it swept over the wreckage the survivors were using as a shelter. The remaining survivors had very little food, and in an act of desperation they started to eat the bodies of the other dead passengers who had been preserved in the snow. Many people have condemned these acts of cannibalism, but you have to remember that these survivors were stuck in a harsh environment some 11,800 feet up with little food and no source of heat. These were desperate times, and desperate times do indeed call for desperate measures. The survivors managed to hang on for more than 2 months until they were rescued on the 23rd of December, a significant time after the search for survivors had already been abandoned. It was only by chance that they were found after 2 of the passengers embarked on a 10-day trek across the Andes to find help, and luckily came across the Chilean Sergio Catalan. The whole ordeal can be seen in the 1993 movie Alive. Tell us about your favorite survival stories in the comments below, and take care.